Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Public Sector Sales Podcast. I'm Jason Tussell, and today we're going to be talking about how to choose what you shouldn't bid on in the public sector. Bidding is a very time-intensive and resource-intensive task. You need to make sure you're only bidding on work which you have a high chance of winning. But the question is, how can you actually decide what that is? Today, we're joined by Matthew Walker, Technical Director at Executive Compass, to talk about how you can choose what you should and shouldn't bid on in the public sector. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
For those who don't know, who are you and what do you guys do at Executive Compass?
Yeah, so we're bid and tendering consultants. So we support organisations from the point that they spot an opportunity they might want to bid for through to the point that they submit to bid for public sector work with the best possible chance of success. So
as I referenced in the introduction, there are thousands of tenders and opportunities published into the public sector every year. But the real question is, as a supplier, especially for smaller ones, which one should we actually focus our time and effort into actually bidding on and trying to win? But more often than not, they don't. So for you, why is it that suppliers often go for opportunities which realistically, in retrospect, they actually didn't have that good a chance of winning?
I think it could come from a few different places. And I think for a lot of bidder organisations, it comes from that really, really positive place of they just want to get on, essentially. They've got a good level of determination. They spot an opportunity, think we could win it, let's give it a go. So it's like I say, it's really, really positive mindset in a lot of ways, but there's missing some key considerations with it. And as you said, it could lead to quite a high volume of bids being submitted without necessarily having the highest chance of success. So that could be one factor, just like I say, a genuine determination to win more work and not really applying the more strategic or methodical decision-making process to it. For a lot of organisations, though, it just doesn't really factor into the process at all. They maybe don't recognise the cost of bidding in itself. They see it as being something they can do internally, it's free of charge in monetary terms, but there's so much time and effort that goes into bidding that maybe some organisations don't necessarily capture when they are making those decisions.
So touching on that, and it's quite an important point to emphasise, I think, what is the cost of bidding, essentially? Like what resources and time that perhaps suppliers don't typically think that goes into a bid, but actually does, and actually might cost them time on, say, bidding on something they actually have more chance of winning. So what is the cost of bidding? Yeah.
To bid well, we need input from all different people across the organisation. So you need subject matter experts in all different aspects of service delivery to feed in their knowledge, their insight, their ideas, their proposals for how different areas of service delivery will be achieved. So classic examples of that, we'll have an IT manager maybe, an HR manager, health and safety manager. All these different experts would need to contribute input, even if they're not actually putting pen to paper and writing responses. They still need to be involved quite heavily to bring that knowledge and expertise to the table. We need somebody to be managing the bid from commencement through to completion. Again, that I think for a lot of organisations, I think of that as quite a straightforward administrative task. It's a hugely complex activity to manage a bid, through to completion. I suppose identifying it in the first place takes time, but then managing the submission on the portal, accessing the documents, scrutinising the terms and conditions, ensuring that everyone else who needs to be involved in the process is doing what they need to do and is progressing as it should, ensuring a complete compliant submission is made. All these different activities that a bid manager might undertake, massive investment of time. Completing the pricing submission, so the commercial element of the bid, again, that can be very time consuming, depending on the sector or the industry that the supplier is in. It could be a line-by-line schedule that needs to be completed quite meticulously to ensure a competitive bid with unit costs for all different item lines, all different aspects of the service. And then from our perspective, obviously the area we add a lot of value is writing, the narrative, quality responses. We could be looking at, in a lot of cases, average sort of size tender, maybe 10, 12,000 words. Not uncommon to see 20, 30 or more thousand words going into a public sector tender. It's a massive amount of time. We're talking about weeks and weeks worth of time that are being invested by an organisation in some of these larger tenders.
So on that, with in mind just how resource intensive bidding can be, suppliers shouldn't underestimate just sort of the potential cost of bidding on something which probably isn't worth their time.
Mm-hmm.
What strategies and things should suppliers have in mind when deciding what they should bid on, sort of as it's called, for bid no bid process? What are the key factors they should consider so that they have a higher chance of bidding on something which they're actually more likely to win?
I'd sort of split into three main areas. So I'd always say to an organisation, you've got to think about, can you deliver the work to a high standard? Can you prove to an evaluator that you can deliver it to a high standard? And do you actually want to deliver it in the first place? It's the third one that a lot of bidders forget about. I think, again, it comes from that determination to win some work and to be involved. A lot of organisations forget to actually look really carefully at the opportunity and say, not just is it, are we right for the opportunity, but is it right for us as well? Is this something that we want to do? I've spoken with a lot of organisations where I've asked them about the bids that they've been successful with, and they'd say, oh, well, we did win this one, but we wish we hadn't, because it ended up being a bit of an operational headache for them. They're really, really complex, not necessarily profitable. So we do need to think about all those different categories. Like I say, don't forget about, do we want to deliver it? Is it profitable to us? Is it an area that we'd like to expand, and does it align with our corporate strategy as an organisation to be moving in those areas? Again, we do get organisations that come to us very, very reactively with an opportunity, and all they've done is look at it and say, could we do this? But it's going to take them into a new geography maybe, or into a new area of service delivery, which wasn't necessarily something they want to do. Nothing wrong with that if they then look at it and say, actually it does suit, and it is something we would feel would be a good fit for us. But you need to have that quite careful assessment of that before identifying that you do want to bid for that opportunity.
So for you then, it's less of doing what you might term a scattergun approach to just bidding on things that sound appealing, putting lots of different teams on lots of different bids, but taking the time and effort to really think about each bid in turn. And like you say, key considerations like, do we actually want to deliver this in the first place? Absolutely,
yeah. Well, one of the issues with the scattergun approach is that there needs to be time saving somewhere within that process. So if we bid for 100 opportunities, and to do a good job on each of them, we know it's going to take X many days, but we don't have that time available. You see organisations then cutting corners potentially. That's where you see copy and paste being used. It's where you see there not being any research undertaken on the opportunity. As you mentioned, it's where you see people who might not actually have specific expertise in those areas being drafted in to support. It doesn't lead to the highest quality bid. So it kind of doubles up the negative impacts of it, in that you might start by already bidding for a lot of opportunities that you can't win. But even the ones that you could have won, they become losses as well, because they're not able to invest the time that we need to on those. So yeah, I definitely agree. I think a scattergun approach very, very rarely works for any organisation.
I think underpinning this perhaps is a change in mindset that a lot of suppliers need to take, because the question how to choose what you shouldn't bid on is quite negatively framed. But like you said, a lot of suppliers have quite a lot of determination to think, we can deliver this, we can do this, let's bid on all these different things. And then ultimately they come away thinking, oh, why didn't we win it? It's because we only spent a fraction of the resources on it, because we were so split across so many different opportunities. So what do you think that kind of mindset change needs to look like? How should bidders change how they think about opportunities in the public sector?
The big thing for me is remember that it's a competition. So very often organisations' bid decision-making process is based on looking at the opportunity and saying, is there a single specific reason that we can't win? And very often the answer would be no to that question. You could look at the document and say, there's no what we'll call knockout criteria. There's nothing in there which is going to immediately exclude us from that process. So we'll say yes. And they're just missing that second layer maybe of looking at it a little bit more analytically. And instead of just saying, is there any one big knockout criterion, which means we can't do it, say, is it a good fit for us? Is it something that we should do, rather than just, is there a particular reason why we shouldn't do it? So that's the thing for me really, is recognising it's a competition. We won't be the only bidder who's competent, compliant. There will be other organisations in that process as well who can tick the minimum boxes. Is, can we do it well? Can we actually prove to the reader that we can deliver that service to the highest standard?
On that question that suppliers should ask themselves, is this opportunity right for us? In your experience, what does that sort of self-reflection process look like? What kind of factors and questions should suppliers be asking themselves before they decide to bid on a piece of work?
There'll be a lot. Fundamentally, they need to look at the service which is being commissioned and say, is this a good reflection of either something that we already do successfully? And again, that's really beneficial because it allows you to evidence to the buyer. As I was saying, it's not just that we can do the work, it's that we can prove to a reader we can do it as well. So something we've got a good strong foothold can be really advantageous because we can then demonstrate a good track record to that buyer. But then also in terms of that service, not just, again, that one camp of can we do it, but also do we want to deliver those services as well? Coming back to that idea of, is it a direction of travel that we want to go in, essentially? So definitely looking at the service. Geography, 100% can be important. And again, it will differ massively between different sectors and industries and services. You could get an organisation who works exclusively online, delivers digital services, where it's quite a minor factor for them. But a lot of organisations will need to be on site within X minutes of X, Y, and Z happen and you have an emergency taking place on site, they need to have, again, a really good, strong geographic foothold as well. So looking at the geography, again, can we do it, but also do we want to work in those areas? Value is obviously massively important as well. And looking at that from both directions, can we demonstrate to a buyer that we can deliver that sustainably and we've got the financial depth and resilience to deliver that low risk as a solution? But then also looking at saying, can we derive a profit from it as well? Which again, surprisingly, a lot of bidders don't think about. They're looking and say, can we do it? They don't say, would we make money in the process of doing it?
Yeah, digging into that a bit more, about sort of the unintended consequences of winning work. I mean, winning work is obviously very good, but like you said, in the long term, actually be a bit detrimental because it forces you into situations which you hadn't expected. It's going to actually cost perhaps more in the long run. What are those kind of key unintended consequences you touched on before that suppliers should have in the back of their minds as a sort of warning, perhaps against bidding on something that looks maybe a very large opportunity, but actually in the long run will put more burden on them, but actually it's worth it?
I suppose you'd always expose yourself to risk whenever you go into that process. So if you're successful and you start delivering the contract, there's immediately risks that you might fail to deliver to the required standards. So there'll be reputational risks there, risks of contract failure. We need to really think about those. And again, particularly if we have that scattergun approach and we don't do the analysis to say, can we resource this? Have we got the competencies in-house? Are we actually able to deliver this to the standard expected by the buyer? There's big, big risks there to the organisation, and they could, be successful, talk a good game in the tender potentially. And then when it comes to delivery, actually not be successful. So that's a really key thing to think about, like I say, those risks of contract failure, reputational risks that could come with that. Alongside that, we'd also really think about the impact it has on other services that the organisation is delivering as well. So picking up this contract, fantastic. We might say within our responses, we've got 100 engineers working nationally who are able to work on this contract. But if they're all working full-time on these other contracts the organisation already has, we do need to think about the impact that could have on existing service delivery. Could that lead to other contracts not being delivered to the required standard? So coming back to the central idea, it's so important that we do look at all those questions quite carefully before we say yes or no to an opportunity.
So as we've talked about, bidding is a very time-intensive, resource-intensive process, and very often suppliers won't be successful ultimately in their bids. What would you say to those suppliers that feel like that was all just a waste of time and that we shouldn't have bothered in the first place?
I think we always have to remember that you can't guarantee success when you go into the process. And we've spoken a lot about the different reasons we might choose not to bid. If we're too conservative at the same time, we don't want to go to the opposite extreme of the scattergun approach where we only bid if we know that we're the odds-on favourite to be successful, because we'd limit ourselves far too much. We need to be a little bit speculative when bidding, or else we're just closing too many doors on ourselves. So there's always a chance of being successful. There's always a chance of being unsuccessful. And we just have to accept that a little bit when bidding for that work. If we're not successful, I wouldn't say that all that time has been wasted anyway. There'll be a lot of learning that we can take from there. So you can imagine an organisation, let's say an organisation has a single contract they're looking to retain. They bid once every 5 years when that comes out for renewal or retender. That organisation, if they're not bidding for other works in the meantime, all they can refer back to in terms of their learning is what happened 5 years ago. Whereas their competitors, they could be participating in the tender process on a daily basis. They could be gaining all of that insight into what evaluators need to see. So we need to really use that. I'd say we don't want to look at every bid that we've bid, every opportunity that we bid for and not been successful for as a waste of time, because we're missing out all of the valuable learning that we could take from it to drive continuous improvement.
So to touch more on that sort of positive side of this question, what certain sort of nuggets of information, sort of signals should suppliers be looking out for in opportunities that signal that actually this is a really good opportunity, we should invest our time in, but in the sort of bid, no bids equation, it is actually very much worth our time?
I think there's a few things which are underappreciated by bidder organisations when they're weighing up opportunities. Sometimes they just look at the opportunity right in front of them and they look at the value of that and say, is it worth the time invested to win that work? Without thinking about the collateral benefits and how that could serve as a stepping stone. So I mentioned that we might need to look at our experience and say, have we got a good track record that we can use to bid successfully? But if we always exclude every opportunity where we don't have that, we'll never gain the experience, which could be a launch pad to future opportunities. That's a really big one from our perspective. It's saying, how could this serve as a stepping stone to more work? It might not be the most lucrative opportunity today, but it creates a new relationship with a new buyer, or it gives us a new service line that could then be used to expand massively into, again, much more lucrative areas. So that's a really key thing to consider. Alongside that, another thing to consider is off the back of that, we also gain subject matter expertise, which could be brought in-house. So new technical knowledge, new technical experience, which could be developed, which again can benefit the organisation, not just for the bids they're looking at today, but across the organisation as a whole as well.
So to wrap up then, what are your 3 key tips for suppliers on deciding what they shouldn't bid on in the public sector?
So definitely don't be scattergun. Definitely don't just apply for everything, which looks like it could be relevant. But at the same time, I'd say top tip is don't go too far the other way either. We do see a lot of organisations that are shy about bidding for anything if they're not the odds-on favourite. You very rarely will be. You'll really struggle to grow the business if you don't expose yourself to a little bit of that risk of not being successful. So it is important to take part in the process. You can't win them all, but you have to participate if you do want to be successful in the long run. I'd also say don't forget, when you're looking at different opportunities, don't just look at it through the lens of, can we do it? Ask yourself, do we want to do it as well? Really think about the tender process as being a support to your corporate strategy as an organisation. If an opportunity doesn't feed into that, I'm not saying no bid for it, but be a little bit critical and really scrutinise it and say, is this the right direction for us to move it? Last thing I'd say, and I really do recommend this, I always think that the bid no bid process should be documented in some way. A lot of organisations look at the opportunity in front of them, say yes or no. If it's a yes, it progresses and we complete it. If it's a no, it goes into the scrap pile and it's never thought of again. Again, we're losing a lot of learning if we do that. I think a much better approach is to actually list all those different criteria which could be of interest to that particular organisation. So think about what your bid no bid criteria are. Think about the things which matter to you and actually score opportunities against them. And that way you can come up with something a little bit more evidence-based that you can look back at and maybe notice patterns and trends that otherwise you might not have seen. Is there a reason that the ones which lose and the ones which win? And maybe then we can improve that bid no bid process moving forward.
Excellent. Well, that was all extremely helpful. Thank you very much, Matthew.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Public Sector Sales Podcast. I've been James. If you want to listen to all of our other episodes, they're available on our YouTube channel. If you want to keep up to date with all of our new content, analysis and research, follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. If you want to learn more about the expert bid and tender writing services offered by Executive Compass, head over to their website. And if you want to learn more about us at Tussle and our market intelligence platform, head over to tussle.com. See you next time.